There's something nobody tells you about being the first person in your family to actually make something of yourself. The success doesn't protect you. If anything, it makes you a target. I'm 29 years old. I'm a licensed pharmacist and the sole owner of a compounding pharmacy I built from a $40,000 personal loan I took out at 24. I live alone in a 2-bedroom condo I bought in Charlotte, North Carolina, 2 years ago. It's worth $780. Zero now. I know that number because my brother asked me what it was worth at Christmas last year. And I made the mistake of telling him, "My name is Claire." And for most of my life, I thought working harder than everyone around me would eventually earn me a seat at the table. It took my parents' anniversary dinner to teach me that some families don't want to give you a seat. They want to take your chair. My family is not poor. My father ran a decent landscaping company for 20 years. My mother worked as a school administrator. We weren't struggling. But somewhere along the way, the dynamic in our house became very clear. My brother Derek was the favorite, and I was the one expected to carry what Derek couldn't. Derek is 33. He has never held a job longer than 8 months. He has a habit of starting things, a food truck, a resale business, a consulting practice he described to relatives but never explained, and leaving them quietly when they required sustained effort. My parents have bailed him out so many times that at some point the bailout stopped feeling like emergencies and started feeling like a subscription service. I watched all of this and decided very young that I would not be a person who needed rescuing. I studied relentlessly. I worked a part-time job through all 4 years of undergrad. I got into pharmacy school on my own. I took on debt strategically and paid it off faster than the terms required. When I opened my pharmacy at 24, I was the youngest licensed pharmacy owner in my county. My parents came to the ribbon cutting. My mother cried. My father shook my hand like I was a business associate he'd just met. Derek didn't come. He sent a text that said, "Congrats, sis," with a thumbs-up emoji. Over the next 5 years, I poured everything into that business. I hired 3 employees. I built relationships with local physicians. I moved into a specialty niche in hormone therapy and wound care that kept us stable when larger chains squeezed the general market. I bought my condo in year 6. I furnished it myself, one piece at a time, with money I had actually earned. My family never once asked how I did it, but they always knew what things cost. The dinner was my parents' 35th anniversary. My mother had been planning it for months. She reserved the private dining room at a restaurant called Harmon's OK, which is the kind of place with cloth napkins and a sommelier and a prix-fixe menu. I offered to help pay for the room. My mother said no. She had it handled. And then 3 weeks before the event, she called me and said the deposit was higher than expected and could I cover the difference. I transferred $1. $400 without blinking. I want to be clear about who was at this dinner. It was not intimate. There were 22 people in that room. My parents' closest friends, my mother's sister and her husband, 3 of my father's brothers, their wives, one of their adult kids, my grandmother on my mother's side, who was 81 and sharp as a tack, and Derek, with his girlfriend of 4 months, a woman named Priya, who I had met exactly once before that night. I arrived early to help with the setup. I rearranged the centerpieces because they were blocking sightlines across the table. I confirmed the dietary restrictions with the server. I handled the welcome playlist on the restaurant's Bluetooth speaker because nobody else thought to bring one. I did all of this quietly, without being asked. Because that is what I do. When everyone arrived, I was placed at the far end of the table. Derek sat at my father's right hand. Dinner was lovely. Genuinely. The food was excellent. My grandmother told a story about my parents' wedding that made everyone laugh. My mother's sister gave a toast that was warm and a little long. I sipped my wine and felt something close to peaceful, which I should have recognized as a warning sign. It was during dessert that my father stood up. He tapped his glass and smiled the way he smiles in photographs wide. Deliberate. Performed. He said he wanted to take a moment to share some exciting news. He said that 35 years of marriage had taught him that family was the only thing that mattered. He said he and my mother had been talking for a long time about how to do right by their children. He looked at Derek. He said that Derek had been working very hard lately, and I want to pause here because I need you to understand that everyone at that table had watched Derek not work hard for over a decade. And not one person flinched at this sentence, and that Derek and Priya were ready to start building a real future together. He said that as a gift, to help them begin that future, he and my mother had decided that the family would be contributing my condo, not a condo. My condo. He said my address out loud. He said the square footage. He said the approximate current market value. He smiled at Derek. He started to applaud. Several people at the table began to clap before they had time to think about what they were clapping for. I did not move. I sat with my dessert fork in my hand, and I felt something cold travel from my sternum straight down through my stomach. I have read accounts of people describing shock as a kind of stillness. And I understand that now in a way I did not before that moment. My mother was watching me. She had the expression of someone who is waiting for a transaction to complete. I set my fork down. I said, very quietly, "That's not yours to give." My father kept smiling. He said, "Claire, we've talked about this." We had not talked about this. There is not a version of this conversation that happened. I have run it back in my mind 1,000 times since, and there is simply no world in which my father sat across from me and said, "We're going to announce to 22 people that we're transferring your property to your brother," and I nodded and said, "Sounds great." It did not happen. I said, "No, we haven't. And my condo is not a family asset. It's mine. I bought it. I hold the deed." My father's smile shifted. It didn't disappear. But something underneath it changed. The way a light changes when a cloud moves over it. He said I was being dramatic. My mother said, "Claire, please, not tonight." I looked around the table. My grandmother was watching me steadily. My father's brothers were looking at their plates. Derek was looking at me with an expression I can only describe as impatient. As if I was the one causing a disruption. As if the unreasonable thing happening was my objection and not the announcement itself. Priya was looking at Derek. I said, "I'm not being dramatic. I'm being accurate. The condo is my property. I'm not transferring it to anyone." My father put his glass down. The performance dropped entirely. He leaned forward and said, in a voice low enough that only the people nearest to him could hear clearly, that I had always had a problem with generosity, that everything I had because of this family, that Derek needed a foundation and I had more than enough, and my selfishness was an embarrassment. Something cracked open in me that I have never been able to fully close since I pushed my chair back. I said I was leaving. I picked up my clutch. I said goodnight to my grandmother specifically. By name? Because she was the only person in that room who had looked at me like I was a human being in the last 10 minutes. I was almost to the door of the private dining room when my father grabbed my arm. He didn't grab it gently. He grabbed it the way you grab something you're trying to stop from leaving. And when I pulled away, he grabbed it again. Harder. And the momentum of that, the force of the pull and my resistance, sent me sideways into the edge of the door frame. My head hit the wood molding on the right side of the door. I went down. I don't have a clean memory of the next few minutes. I remember the floor being cold. I remember my grandmother's voice, sharp and upset. I remember someone saying call 911 and someone else saying no. Don't. Just give her a minute. And I remember thinking very clearly, in a strange calm, that the second voice was my mother. An ambulance came anyway. My grandmother called. At the hospital they did a CT scan. I had a concussion moderate, they said. I had a contusion on my right temple that swelled badly enough that the nurse brought me an ice pack without my asking. My right shoulder was badly bruised from where I'd landed. They kept me for 4 hours. My parents did not come to the hospital. Direkt textet mig att 11:47 pm. The text said, "Hope you feel okay." Dad didn't mean it like that. I stared at that text for a long time. My grandmother came. She sat with me in the hospital room for 2 hours and held my hand and did not offer a single excuse for what had happened. At one point she said, "I have watched your father his whole life. He has always confused entitlement with love. That is the most precise sentence anyone has ever said to me about my family." The next morning, my shoulder still aching and the headache sitting behind my right eye like a nail, I called an attorney I knew professionally, a woman named Dr. Sandra Okafor, who had referred clients to my pharmacy and whose card I had kept in my desk drawer. I told her what happened. I told her about the announcement. I told her about the door frame. I told her about the text from Derek. She told me to document everything before I did anything else. I typed out a full written account while it was still fresh. I took photos of my shoulder and my temple. I checked my phone and found that 3 people at that dinner, including my mother's sister, who had been seated near the door, had sent me messages after the fact. 2 of them had been filming the toasts. My mother's sister, whose name is Renee, sent me a video clip the next afternoon. She said she'd been recording my father's toast to send to relatives who couldn't attend. The clip showed everything: the announcement, my objection, my father's face changing, and then the moment at the door, the second grab, my shoulder hitting the frame, my fall. It was 38 seconds of footage. I watched it 4 times. Then I forwarded it to Sandra. What happened in the following weeks moved faster than I expected and slower than I needed. Sandra sent a formal cease and desist to my parents on my behalf, noting that any attempt to transfer, encumber, or lay claim to my property would be met with immediate legal action. She also communicated clearly that the incident at Harmon's constituted assault under North Carolina law and that a police report had been filed. My father called me once during this period. He did not apologize. He said I had lawyered up over nothing and that I was destroying the family. I let the call go to voicemail after the first 15 seconds and gave the recording to Sandra. My mother texted me every few days. The text cycled through stages. First, asking me to calm down. Then, explaining that my father hadn't meant it the way it looked. Then, and this is the one that I have returned to more times than I can count, a long message explaining that she and my father had always known my condo would eventually belong to the family because they had raised me with family values and that I apparently hadn't understood this. I forwarded every message to Sandra without responding. The police report resulted in a formal citation. My father was cited for misdemeanor assault. He retained his own attorney. He is contesting it. I went back to work. I managed my pharmacy. I took my medication for the concussion symptoms. I had a follow-up with my neurologist, 3 weeks out, and received a clean bill. My shoulder healed. What did not heal quickly was the question I kept circling back to: how long had my parents been planning this? Was this conversation happening in their house for months while I was showing up to holidays and helping cover deposits and sending birthday gifts and having no idea that in their mental accounting, what was mine was already spoken for? My grandmother answered that question for me. Partly. Over lunch one afternoon, she called and asked me to come. And I went. She told me that she had first heard something about Claire's place mentioned at Thanksgiving. 4 months before the anniversary dinner. She said she had assumed it was misunderstanding. She had not realized it was a plan. 4 months. I have thought about what that means. While I was living my life, working my business, believing I was a person with a future I had built and owned, the 2 people who were supposed to love me most were making arrangements to hand that future to someone else. They did not ask. They did not hint. They set a date. They chose a venue. They waited for dessert. Renee has stopped speaking to my parents. She told me this herself. She said what she saw in that video and in that room was not something she could look past. I did not ask her to take my side. She arrived there on her own. Derek and Priya got engaged. I found out through an Instagram post. I sent nothing. I have not spoken to my parents since the night my grandmother sat with me in that hospital room and told me that entitlement and love were not the same thing. My attorney tells me the civil component my parents' stated intent to transfer my property without my consent is being taken seriously. There is documentation. There is a video. There are witnesses. My father's claim that this was a misunderstanding is somewhat complicated by the fact that he stated my exact address and market value in front of 22 people. Some mornings I wake up, and the loss of it hits me all at once, not the condo. Not the money. But the story I had been telling myself about my family. The version where they were proud of me. The version where what I had built mattered to them because it was mine. Not because it was transferable. I do not know if my father will face consequences beyond the citation. The legal system moves at its own pace and offers no guarantees. What I know is that there is a video. What I know is that my grandmother sat with me when my parents did not. What I know is that I went back to my pharmacy on Monday morning and opened the doors and helped my patients and deposited my revenue and made my mortgage payment on a property that belongs to me. I have stopped waiting for my family to recognize what I built. I built it without their recognition the first time. I will continue to do so. There is a framed photo on my desk at work. It's from the ribbon cutting of my pharmacy. 5 years ago. I'm 24 inches the photo. Standing in front of my own door. Holding a pair of gold scissors I rented from the Chamber of Commerce for $15. I am grinning, like I cannot believe where I am standing. I look at it sometimes when the headache comes back. Which it still does. Faintly. When I'm tired. I do not take it down.